Gemma and Milo. You got to be kidding, expelled Gemma, throwing her hands into the air. Milo threw his hands up as high as he could go in support. Why is everything a riddle? Milo shook his head furiously in support even more. Maybe we should just climb up the tree and crawl in the window instead. I wonder how Willow'd feel about that. Milo paused. As a lemur, he was no stranger to climbing trees. However, this tree had no branches within reach and was wider than all the trees he'd ever climbed, added up and bunched together like twigs. He could not support this. Gemma settled down in her usual way. She sighed, then stomped, then huffed, then sighed and stomped again. It was after the second stomp that she decided to get back down to business. She paced around as she recited what she could remember of the riddle. She said that the doors will tell us which is right, Gemma recalled, turning to her feet. But we shouldn't use sight or smell or feel. She's talking about our senses. And since there are 5 senses, that only leaves 2. Gemma smiled and snapped her fingers. It means we need to use either taste or sound to find the right door. I think we both know which one she means. Sound. Gemma turned back to find Milo frozen, leaning towards the nearest door with his tongue sticking out, ready to lick. He had guessed taste. Milo slowly pulled his tongue back into his mouth, straightened up and gave it an apologetic grin. Gemma whispered as kindly as she could, "You need to stop licking things, Milo. How many times have I told you?" Milo answered by raising 4 fingers. But, in fact, the right answer was 5. To date, Milo had been caught licking a beehive, wet paint, a sea slug, a particularly delicious looking bar of pink soap. The door made 5, but given the circumstances, it is understandable that Milo did not think to count this instance so soon after retracting his tongue. Gemma joined him by the tree. It's got to be sound. We need to listen to hear what's inside. You take this door, and I'll take the other. They positioned themselves each with an ear against a door. Hear anything? Gemma asked. Milo heard nothing and shook his head. Gemma strained to hear a noise. Any noise at all inside. But there was none. She sighed and was getting ready to stomp and huff until something hit her. Wait just a second. Willow said that one of these doors has stairs behind it, and the other is a hole that will suck us up and spit us out on the other side of the world. Milo shuddered at the reminder. Gemma reached down to the forest floor and brushed aside some brown and red leaves. She sifted through a group of rocks until she found two that were the size she was looking for. She handed one to a confused Milo and took her place back on the second door. Okay, Milo. We need to knock on the doors and listen for an echo. Milo nodded and pressed his ear against the door again. He knocked 3 times on the door and listened. He knocked 3 more times. He knocked 2 more times. Then he knocked 5 times to a beat. Milo! Milo stopped and smiled at her. Did you hear an echo? Milo nodded and tossed the rock aside, going over to Gemma at her door. That means there should be no echo from this door. Gemma knocked 3 times loudly, and both she and Milo listened. They heard no echo at all. Gemma gave one harder knock. Nothing. There must be stairs behind this one. If it was empty space, then it would echo like yours did. Gemma put her hand on the brass knob and paused. Milo held her leg tight and closed his eyes. If she was right, then the journey would continue. And if she was wrong, then it would end right now at the bottom of the dark sea. Her hand was steady as she turned the knob. But she never got a chance to push. The door flew open and pulled her hand with it. Milo opened his eyes and saw Willow holding a paintbrush and staring up at Gemma. Most people don't use rocks to knock on front doors, said Willow. Willow led Gemma and Milo up to our home, a few flights up inside the enormous tree. The staircase ended on a landing with furniture, among which were 2 comfortable chairs, a bookcase, and a bright slanted desk built into the side of the tree. Just to its right, Willow pushed on the wall until 2 slats popped and swung out. Gemma decided that the window was just as mysterious from the inside and looked like any other spot on the wall until it was opened. She couldn't imagine how skilled a carpenter had made such a feat. Willow sat down at the desk with an orange chair and dipped the paintbrush into a mug of water. Colours flowed from the tip and swirled into a storm of purple and yellow. Gemma noticed a dozen dips in the desk, as if a ball had been repeatedly pressed into it as it was made. Each one was filled with a different colour paint. Too many colours for just one rainbow, Gemma thought. She took a moment to look around and realised that most of the wall was covered with beautiful paintings overlapping each other. There were mountains and rivers and creatures that Gemma had never seen before. Her eyes fixated on a majestic sea monster with two enormous fins and a long neck. "These paintings are wonderful. Where do you find your ideas?" said Gemma. Willow spun her chair around and stared at Gemma with narrow eyes. She studied her for just a moment, but long enough for Gemma to feel shy. "Dreams," replied Willow. "I draw my dreams." In a flash, she spun back with her paintbrush in hand. She hovered between a puddle of sky blue paint and rose red. "I used to draw other things, but now I just draw my dreams." "I wish I could paint," said Gemma sadly. In all her years at sea learning about the world, she had never gotten the hang of drawing and painting. She had decided long ago that it was for other people to be good at, not her. Willow stood up without a sound and walked over to face Gemma. She was at least a loaf of bread shorter, but her stare made Gemma feel small. "No use wishing for things you can have. Painting is just a way of talking with your hands," said Willow. The paintbrush dropped into Gemma's hand. "Find your voice, dear girl." Willow hurried back over to her table and hopped back onto her chair. Reaching inside her jacket pocket, she pulled out another brush and dipped it firmly into the sky blue paint puddle. "Now, enough nonsense. I have work to do. It's time for you both to get moving," said Willow. Gemma patted her shoulder and Milo hopped up. "Moving? But you haven't told us anything." Gemma squeezed the brush in her hand. "About where we're supposed to go, I mean." Willow laughed. "Where else would you go but the top?" she asked. With brush in hand, Willow pointed to a section of clear wood on the wall to her right. Besides the window, it was one of the only places on the tree without paintings. To Gemma, it most resembled the shape of a door. And, my dear friend, as you well know, our first guesses are usually the best ones we have. Still unsure of herself, Gemma walked over and pushed against the wood, the same way that Willow had on the window. With the ease of wind on dry leaves, a door slid open to reveal another staircase. Gemma climbed on the first step, then looked back at Willow. She was at her desk, feverishly painting. Gemma squeezed her gift tightly again, then placed it into her backpack. "Thank you," said Gemma. Willow didn't say another word, nor did she stop what she was doing, for a dream had come back to her, and such fleeting things cannot be put aside for pleasantries. Gemma and Milo ascended only a few steps before the door shut behind them. The design was so perfect that not a speck of light from Willow's home made it to the stairs. They climbed in darkness from there on out. It wasn't long before Gemma figured out the way of the staircase. It was winding, taking them up and up in what seemed like a never-ending spiral. They climbed for hours, taking only a few breaks to eat a small licorice snack or catch their breath. Milo didn't complain, even though each step for a human equals 2 steps for a lemur. "This must be the tallest tree ever," said Gemma. It seemed that with each flight of stairs, her legs were shouting louder for her to stop and plant herself, to become a part of the tree and grow roots. It was not soon after that, on step number 5040 for her and 10,080 for Milo, that she hit her head on a wooden board. She lifted it up and saw the dim glow of light above her. It was a trapdoor. They had finally reached the top. They crawled up out of the stairwell and shut the trapdoor behind them. After a moment of cheering and exhausted high fives, they looked around at their new surroundings, happy to be out of the dark and done with stairs. It was a circular room with a tall cylinder in the center. A large lantern was held fast on top of it. The walls and the ceilings were covered by what looked like a large patchwork quilt. Only a wooden skeleton frame made it a room and kept the cloth from falling on them. Milo hopped on to the cylinder and noticed that there was a knob for the lantern. A lemur's eyes adjust to the dark much faster than the humans in cases such as this. With a shrug, Milo turned the lantern on. The room began to shake. Instead of a small light, a huge flame had erupted from the lantern. The quilt began to rise over their heads. It reminded Gemma of her mother tucking her in at night. She would take the sheet on Gemma's bed and lift it up swiftly, then let it float down gently onto Gemma. But this time the quilt kept rising. Gemma held onto the nearest wooden post and braced herself. The walls of quilt expanded outward and upward toward the night sky. The moon hit both of their faces as the room was pushed up and off the top of the tree. It is easy to understand why Gemma had not realized it sooner, as this was the first time she had ever been inside a hot air balloon. Sorry, but this story is to be continued. Make sure you like, share and subscribe so you don't miss out the next part of this series. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a like and write down what part you like the most in the comments section. What do you think will happen next? Make sure to write down your thoughts and ideas in the comments section. Thank you for watching and I hope you enjoyed. Goodbye.